The human was holding her daughter. Velshara had crossed 11 transit corridors, overridden 4 security locks, and killed 1 Dominion drone with her bare foreclaws to reach this station. She had arrived expecting wreckage. Bodies. The particular silence of a place where all the living things had finished dying. Instead, she found Sergeant Davi Ferreira sitting on the floor of the station's auxiliary med bay, with her daughter's head against its chest. One of Chauvel's smaller claws wrapped around 2 of its fingers, both of them asleep. The emergency lighting pulsed. Red amber. Red amber. Velshara stood in the doorway and did not move. She was sovereign of the Kethani plurality. She had led 7 campaigns. She had made decisions that ended star systems, not by weapon, but by the careful, the deliberate withdrawal of support from things that could not survive without her people. She had a word in her language for the specific scent of a chamber in which a major choice was made and could not be unmade. She had committed that scent to memory 31 times. She was standing in it now. Her second caste honor guard pressed forward at her back, 12 of them, armed, their carapaces cycling through the alert pattern, deep crimson bleeding into the segmented white of attack readiness. Velshara raised 1 foreleg, and they stopped. The human stirred. It did not wake with the flailing panic motion she had observed in other bipedal species when roused from sleep in hostile environments. It simply opened its eyes, registered the 12-armed Kethani warriors and 1 sovereign queen blocking the doorway, and then looked down at Chauvel to check that the hatchling was still breathing. It was. Only then did the human look back at Velshara. The emergency light pulsed. Red amber, 1, 2, 3, 4. Velshara counted them without deciding to. She had never seen this species up close. The Kethani plurality's files on humanity were comprehensive. She had reviewed them on the transit. And yet the files had failed to account for the specific quality of a human face at rest, which was somehow both entirely undefended and entirely unmoved. This one was not young. Its skin was the warm dark of deep earth minerals, and there were marks on it that Velshara's files said were called scars, which meant healed damage, which meant this creature had been damaged many times and had refused to remain that way. It shifted Chauvel's weight very gently, settling the hatchling against the wall in a way that kept the injured wing joint supported. It stood. It did not reach for a weapon. The holster at its hip contained 1, and it did not reach for it. It looked at Velshara and waited. Velshara's second caste commander, Tavel, clicked her mandibles in the pattern that meant execute on your orders, Sovereign. The human had to know what that sound meant. The Kethani made that sound at the start of every recorded engagement on file. It was in the briefing materials. The human straightened slightly, not a flinch, more like a person finding their balance, and went on waiting. Red amber, 5, 6. Chauvel woke. She woke the way Kethani hatchlings always woke, in a sudden rush from stillness to motion, and she registered the room, the guards, the weapons, the sovereign light emanating from Velshara's primary thorax plate, which hatchlings were biologically encoded to recognize before they could see color. And she did 2 things in rapid succession that Velshara had not anticipated. She said, very clearly, "Don't." And she moved to stand in front of the human. Velshara's scent glands released a sharp, involuntary spike of something that was not anger and was not fear. There was no clean word for it. The closest in Kethani was Velthon, which meant the disorientation of receiving information that cannot be integrated into existing structure. Her daughter, her 3-cycle-old hatchling, who did not yet have her adult carapace plates, who was still soft along the thorax, who had never once in her short life disobeyed a sovereign directive, even in play, was standing between 12 armed warriors and one unarmed human. With her small limbs spread wide and her bioluminescent markings cycling through the most aggressive display, her immature system could manage, which, objectively, was not very aggressive. She was small. The display was more alarmed firefly than sovereign warning. The human looked down at Chauvel. Something moved in its face that Velshara's files called an expression. Though her files were clearly inadequate, because the files had not prepared her for the particular way this human's expression looked at her daughter. The same way Velshara looked at Chauvel when no one was watching. "It's okay," the human said, in passable Cathani. "Low, directed at the hatchling. I've got it." And then it gently took hold of Chauvel's shoulder, through the wing joint, the safe grip, the grip that did not compress the still-forming carapace, and moved her to one side. It stepped forward. Red amber, 7, 8, 9. Velshara felt Tavel vibrate with the need for the order. She did not give it. The human stopped at a distance that Cathani military code classified as respectful formal. It did not bow, which would have been the correct diplomatic gesture. It stood with its hands visible and its eyes on Velshara, and it said, again in Cathani, with an accent that mangled the register tones but hit every critical consonant. "Sovereign, your daughter is safe. She has been safe. You have my word on it." Velshara had executed beings for less than what this creature had just done. Less than touching royal blood. Less than speaking to a sovereign without permission. Less than the simple fact of existing in proximity to a Cathani hatchling while armed and human. Red amber, 10, 11. Chauvel said, "Mother, he kept me alive." The light pulsed, and Velshara did not move, and the human stood there with its hands open, and its scars, and its adequate Cathani, and waited for whatever she was going to do. And the thing that would not integrate kept battering against the inside of her cognition. It had moved her daughter out of the line of fire, not into safety, into the wall. It had put itself in between. She did not give the order. She said, "Confine the human. Separate quarters. Leave it alive." She said it to Tavel without looking at Tavel. "And someone bring my daughter to me." Chauvel did not go to Velshara, so she went back to the human and pressed her head against its arm, the way Cathani hatchlings pressed against their broodmother when they were afraid. The emergency light pulsed. Velshara counted. The station was called Waypoint Herath. It had been a fuel exchange post before the Dominion had decided the corridor belonged to them. And now it was the site of a 9-day siege that had apparently ended approximately 46 hours before Velshara's arrival, when Sergeant Ferreira and a unit of 7 humans had somehow convinced a Dominion boarding party that the entire station was structurally compromised. They had done this by playing engine distress recordings over the external comm array, and then sealing the Dominion team inside an actual collapsing section of the port module, when the section had not been collapsing before they sealed it. Velshara reviewed the tactical records in her mobile command space, while 3 of her honor guards stood between her and the door. The data was fragmentary. Herath's systems had taken damage. But there was enough. She could reconstruct the shape of it. 7 humans, 42 Dominion troops, a Cathani princess who had been aboard Herath on a diplomatic observation posting that had been scheduled before anyone knew the Dominion intended the corridor to be a point of incursion. The princess had survived. The Dominion had not held Herath. 5 of the 7 humans were alive. Velshara did not need to review records to know that Chauvel was alive because the human had kept her alive. Her daughter's scent markers had told her that, in the first moment, the specific chemical signature of a hatchling who has experienced fear and survived it, and been held and been calmed, There was a second scent layered in with Chauvel's own, something mammalian and warm, and it had permeated her daughter's carapace the way scents did when contact was long and repeated. Her daughter smelled like the human. Velshara closed the tactical record. She had not slept. She had been awake for 41 hours of transit and arrival and assessment, and she did not intend to sleep until she understood the shape of what had happened here. Because the shape felt like something she did not yet have language for, and that sensation was not acceptable to her. She was sovereign of the Cathani plurality. She did not have things she lacked language for. She went to observe the human. Ferreira's confinement quarters were a converted storage bay, 2 corridors from Chauvel's assigned rooms. Velshara's people had cleared it and installed a basic monitoring array. Through the monitor feed, she watched the human sit on the floor. It seemed to prefer the floor to the available furniture, and eat from a ration pack with the methodical efficiency of something that viewed food as fuel, and had long since stopped expecting it to be pleasant. Chauvel's rooms were 2 corridors away, and Chauvel was almost certainly awake, Velshara knew, because Chauvel had not come to her after the initial reunion, and was not sleeping when she should be sleeping. And the hatchling's scent, even at this distance, carried the particular acidic edge of anxious waiting. Velshara watched the human eat and tried to categorize it. The Cathani plurality maintained extensive files on every species within engagement range. The files on humanity were comprehensive in the way that all files were comprehensive. Numbers, biology, history, capabilities. She had reviewed them on the transit. She had noted Class 12 Death World of Origin, Persistence Predator Lineage, High Adaptability Index, Documented Extreme Trauma Tolerance, Social Bond Architecture, classified as broad and apparently non-selective. She had read this last classification 3 times and had not found it meaningful until now. Non-selective. The files meant that humans bonded promiscuously, that they did not bond with their own kind and their own kind only, and that they extended the social bond architecture outward in ways that were anomalous for pack predator species. That they pack bonded with other humans, yes, but also with non-human species, with creatures they kept in their homes that served no survival function, with abstract ideas, with things that could not bond back. She had noted this. She had not understood it as a threat. The human finished eating. It folded the ration pack with a neatness that seemed almost ceremonial. Then it leaned back against the wall, looked at the ceiling for a moment, and began to sing. Velshara had been expecting many things. She had not been expecting that. The song had no recognizable structure by Cathani musical taxonomy, which relied on call-response resonance architecture and had a specific codified function for every type of sound communication. This song was neither war call, nor bonding hymn, nor territorial declaration, nor grief rite. It was low and rhythmic, and it seemed to be directed at nothing in particular. It had words in a human language she didn't speak, and her translator gave her fragments. Something about a river. Something about not being afraid, something that might have been a name. It served no tactical function. The monitoring system's audio log marked it as anomalous behavior and flagged it for review. Velshara sat in her command space and listened to an alien sing in a language she didn't speak, and felt the Velthan sensation battering at her again, insistent and untranslatable, and she turned off the feed after 4 minutes and 41 seconds, which was exactly the point at which she became aware that she had not wanted to. "Tell me about your world," Velshara said. Ferreira looked up from the floor of the confinement bay, where it was doing something to a piece of equipment that Velshara's preliminary scan identified as a comms relay junction. It appeared to be repairing Herath's damaged secondary comms array, one component at a time, using the components of its own communications equipment, and had been doing this since approximately 6 hours after confinement. Because apparently, a human given a broken station and free time defaulted to fixing the broken station. She had brought no guard. That had been a choice she was still processing. Chauvel sat beside her, not touching her, in the posture of a hatchling who was trying to be very still and very unobtrusive, and who was not succeeding because her bioluminescent markings kept cycling through her emotion display against her will, in the way that they did when Kethani hatchlings hadn't yet learned to suppress them. Velshara noted hope, relief, something that in an adult she would have called love. Earth, Ferreira said. They put down the relay component. What specifically? The conditions. Ferreira considered this. It had, she had observed, a slight pause before it answered questions, not the pause of deception processing or political calculation, but something else. A pause that felt like the creature was actually deciding what was true instead of deciding what to say. So gravity is about 1.3 of what you'd find comfortable, it said. The atmosphere is oxygen-nitrogen, high reactivity. The surface is about 70% water, most of it in motion. We have 7 major tectonic plates that are still moving. The continent I'm from is sitting on 3 fault lines and gets hit with a major earthquake on average once every 18 cycles. Velshara said, and life evolved there. We're a persistence predator species. Ferreira picked up the relay component again, turned it over. We didn't evolve to outrun anything. We evolved to chase things until they collapsed. Walk for a day and a half, 2 days. The prey falls over eventually. Velshara was quiet for a moment. The files say your storms can be lethal. Yeah. The humans seem to find this unremarkable. Category 5 hurricane, and the wind speed will take most structures apart. Tornadoes can do worse in a smaller area. We get about 2,000 thunderstorms a day globally. Lightning, flooding. Some of them produce hail the size of small projectiles. And you go outside. Ferreira looked at her in a way that suggested it wasn't entirely sure she was serious. We do build shelter. Your immune system keeps us alive against most things. There's a class of pathogen we call viruses that rewrites our cellular machinery from the inside. Our immune system wages a permanent low-level campaign against a few hundred resident species. It paused, or we've got beneficial bacteria in our digestive tract that would kill most species that encountered them. You eat them. We need them. Chauvel's markings cycled through something Velshara had never seen on a hatchling before. She thought it was fascination. The files say you consume ethanol recreationally, Velshara said. It's a social thing. Lowers inhibitions, produces a mild euphoric effect. Ferreira appeared to be watching her the way she was watching it, taking notes. It's technically a solvent, strips lipid membranes. In quantity, it's a neurotoxin. We figured out the dosing. You eat capsaicin. The human's face did something. It was the expression Velshara had begun to understand. That meant the human found something genuinely funny, but was trying not to display it entirely. It's a plant defense compound, it said. Neurotoxin. Evolved to deter mammals from eating the plant's seeds. We found it so unpleasant that we domesticated the plant specifically to get more of it. A pause. Some people put it on everything. Velshara sat with this. Her hands, foreclaws, she corrected in her own cognition, though she had noticed she kept reaching for the wrong word when she thought about this creature, were very still on her thorax plates. She had a habit of counting her carapace segments when she needed to process something difficult. She was on segment 7, The storms killed things, she said. The predators killed things. The tectonic activity killed things. The pathogens killed things. The gravity was wrong. The atmosphere was reactive. The plants evolved neurochemical defenses. Yep, Ferreira said, and your species survived all of it. Took a while. It set down the relay component. We've been trying to kill each other for most of recorded history too, which didn't help. The human's hands were resting on its knees. Velshara looked at them. She had been looking at them intermittently since the medbay. She kept returning to the hands, which were large and thick-fingered and crossed with small scars, healed damage, the record of everything this organism had been through and refused to be stopped by. The bone density under that skin was documented in the files. Her files said a human hand could exert sufficient force to fracture Kethani carapace plate. Chauvel's head was against that arm again. She had drifted there while Velshara was talking, and Velshara had not stopped her. You said took a while, Velshara said. Moaned 200,000 years of anatomically modern humans. We've been a spacefaring species for about 90. 200,000 years. On a world that was trying to kill them, fighting each other as well. Segment 11. Your species, Velshara said, and then stopped because the thing she wanted to say had no clean shape in Kethani, and the closest she could get to it was, your species has no right to exist. She did not say that. She said, what made you stay on this station for 9 days? Against 42 Dominion troops. You had 7 soldiers and a Kethani hatchling. Ferreira was quiet for the pause. She was scared, it said finally, and she was my responsibility. Velshara thought about that for a very long time on the walk back to her command space. She was on segment 14 before she stopped counting, when the attack came from the starboard docking ring. Velshara was in command space when the alert sounded. A Dominion scout team, apparently left behind when the boarding party failed, emerging from a maintenance shaft in the ring with the intention of taking hostages. Her honor guard mobilized. Her tactical display updated in real time. Chauvel was in the secondary medbay. Velshara was already moving when the secondary feed showed her the scout team's projected path. And the scout team's projected path went through the secondary medbay. And she was fast, but the station's corridors were long, and she was not going to make it in time. And she knew this the way she knew all mathematical certainties. Clearly, coldly, with the full weight of it. Chauvel's vital monitor spiked. Fear marker, then pain. Velshara ran. She did not make it in time. But someone else did. The feed from the secondary medbay was fragmentary. The corridor fighting had damaged the monitoring array. But she got enough. She got 2 Dominion scouts breaching the medbay entrance. She got Chauvel at the back of the room, her injured wing joint freshly bandaged, her bioluminescent markings white with shock. She got the Dominion scout raising a weapon. She got Ferreira, coming through the auxiliary corridor entrance from the wrong direction entirely. From the direction that should have had him sealed in confinement 2 corridors away. Moving the way her files said, persistence predators moved. Not fast, precisely, but absolutely directed, with the particular quality of a thing that had decided where it was going and had made its peace with whatever stood between it and there. He took the weapon discharge on his left arm. She watched him take it and keep moving. The fight took 11 seconds. She watched all 11 of them. The 2 Dominion scouts were larger than Ferreira, and there were 2 of them, and it did not help them appreciably. He used his body the way her files said Deathworld organisms use their bodies, as a tool, efficient and entirely unsentimental about its own damage. Then it was over, and Ferreira was on his knees beside Chauvel, and Chauvel was making the sound Kethani hatchlings made when they were in pain. And Ferreira was talking in a low voice, both languages, Kethani and his own, and his left arm was burned from the discharge. And Velshara made it to the medbay 32 seconds after the fight ended. Chauvel had a laceration across the secondary carapace plate. Not deep, but the plate hadn't finished hardening yet, and the bleeding was wrong for the tissue type. Ferreira was applying pressure with a torn piece of his own uniform sleeve, talking her through each breath, watching the wound with the focused attention of something that knew what it was doing and didn't need to think very hard about it. "She needs sealant on the subplate tissue," he said without looking up. "The top layer can close on its own, but the tissue underneath is going to keep bleeding if we don't get a sealant in." He did look up then, to locate Velshara's medic among the honor guard, and he found her and said, "The K-41 sealant in the third case. It's compatible, I checked. 8 hours ago, when I was still in confinement." A pause. I was going to mention it. The medic looked at Velshara. Velshara said, "Do it." The sealant worked. Velshara watched Chauvel's vital markers stabilize in real time and felt something that she was fairly sure had no Kethani taxonomy at all. It was too sharp for relief and too warm for gratitude, and it had the specific chemical signature of something that was going to leave a mark. Chauvel said, from under Ferreira's arm, "I told you." "You did," Ferreira said. "I told Mother you would come." Ferreira's expression did the complicated thing again, the one Velshara was starting to think might be what a face looked like when it was feeling something it didn't want to show. "Yeah," he said. "I know." Velshara looked at the torn piece of uniform sleeve, but it was dark with Chauvel's blood, the copper green of Kethani's circulatory fluid. And it was still pressed against the secondary plate, and Ferreira was holding it there with a burned arm. She should recategorize the confinement protocols. Add restraints. Remove the auxiliary corridor access. The human had compromised a containment structure within 12 hours by apparently memorizing the maintenance shaft layout from a briefing document he had no right to. She put him in the room next to Chauvel instead. She did not examine that decision carefully until later. And even later she found she didn't entirely want to. The maintenance bay was quiet the way only a station could be quiet. A pervasive mechanical hum underlying everything. The distant rhythm of life support doing its work, or the occasional sound of the hull contracting in the local temperature differential. Velshara had been told this section was safe for now. She was trying to believe it. Ferreira was fixing something else. This seemed to be a constant state of affairs. He had been given official non-combatant status and freedom of movement within the station's working areas, and his response to this had been to spend 6 hours assessing every system in sections 2 through 5 and producing a handwritten list of what needed repair and in what order of priority. Velshara had looked at this list. It was correct. Her own engineers had identified 3 of the 11 items. Chauvel was helping. This consisted primarily of handing him components and asking questions, which was a task Chauvel had shown a marked preference for since she could form sentences. Her daughter had been asking questions since before she could walk properly, and this had always been a source of both pride and exhaustion. And watching her apply this quality to the human was... Velshara was looking for the right word. "Why do you fix things?" Chauvel asked, passing a coupling seal. "Because they're broken," Ferreira said. "But the station isn't yours." Ferreira fit the seal and reached for the next component. "Doesn't have to be yours for it to be worth fixing." Chauvel considered this with the gravity that hatchlings applied to everything that didn't match existing categories. Arbiter Velthus says that effort should be proportional to benefit. that you should not invest in systems that will not return value to your holdings. Arbiter Velthus doesn't have to stay on this station. Chauvel's markings flickered through something that, in an adult, would have been dry humor. Neither do you. I'm here now. He looked at her briefly. So is the station. So are the people on it. Seems like a reasonable equation. Velshara was sitting in the corner of the maintenance bay, where she was partially shielded by a coolant exchange unit. She had come in without announcing herself. This had been easy. Her people moved quietly, and the human was absorbed in its work. But she had not left, which was the part of the sequence she was having difficulty justifying to herself. She was watching Chauvel's small claw rest on the toe of the human's boot. It had drifted there incrementally over the past 20 minutes. The human had not moved the boot. Dovey, Chauvel said. The human name, no register tone. Bare and direct in the way only hatchlings and the very old used names in Kithani custom. When you go back to your compact, will you remember this station? Yes, Ferreira said. No hesitation. Will you remember me? The human was quiet for the pause. Chauvel, it said. I'm going to be honest with you. I kept a 9-year-old alive through a 9-day siege. That's going to be in my brain until I die. And I'm planning on living a very long time out of pure spite, so. It made a sound that Velshara had started to recognize as amusement. Yes. Chauvel's markings cycled warm. Spite, she repeated. This word. Your translator. It means a negative thing. Us, why? It means doing something to prove that you can, when someone expected you not to. Ferreira's voice was unchanged, level, the same register it used for component lists and tactical assessments. The Dominion expected us to evacuate. Leaving you behind wasn't an option I considered. Spite seemed like a reasonable motivating force. Chauvel pressed her head briefly against the human's arm. I am glad for your spite. Me too. Velshara sat very still behind the coolant unit. She had a word, Velash, for the sensation of watching something from a distance and understanding it at the same time as being unable to look away. It was used most commonly in the context of witnessing a natural catastrophe. The scale was wrong, the stakes were wrong, and the watching was insufficient to the event, and yet one watched. Chauvel said, and in a voice that was suddenly very small, My mother is frightened of you. Ferreira did not answer immediately. Is that what she is? She is frightened of something. She has not stopped counting since she arrived. The hatchling's markings went quiet. She counts when she does not know what else to do. Velshara became aware that she was on segment 17 and had been counting for the past 4 minutes. She stopped. Your mother, Ferreira said carefully, is trying to figure something out. It passed Chauvel a fastener. I think she'll get there. Chauvel said, she is not used to things she cannot file. Velshara left the maintenance bay without announcing herself. In the corridor, she stopped. Stood for a moment in the dark with the station humming around her. She had not been prepared for the specific sound of her daughter discussing her. She had not been prepared for Chauvel to sound like herself. She walked back to her command space. She did not count segments. She reviewed Arbiter Velthus's transit vector projection and confirmed that he would arrive in 48 hours, and she found, for the first time in 31 major decisions, that she was not sure what choice she was going to make. Arbiter Velthus had been in the plurality's judiciary for longer than Velshara had been alive. He was tall for Kethani, his carapace the deep-weathered amber of extreme age. And he moved with the deliberate care of a being that had learned to conserve every unnecessary motion. he arrived with a tribunal-class escort, 12 judiciary officials, and a formal indictment that had been filed with the plurality's high archive before his ship had even entered transit. The indictment was thorough. Velshara read it twice. The charges against Sergeant Davi Ferreira included unauthorized contact with royal blood, psychological contamination of a Kethani hatchling during developmental stage, unauthorized use of medical practices on a member of the sovereign lineage, and the language here was careful and old and chosen specifically for its weight. Improper bonding influence. The last charge was the one that mattered. It was the one that carried terminal sentencing. Velshara received Velthus in the station's primary assembly space, where her honor guard flanked the walls and his judiciary officials arranged themselves in the formal configuration of a tribunal in session. He bowed. She inclined. The mechanics of power moved through the room like weather. "Sovereign," Velthus said. "The archive has received my filing. The tribunal is constituted. We require the prisoner." "Sergeant Ferreira is in his quarters," Velshara said. "We require him here." She gave the order. She gave it because she was the sovereign, and she had reviewed the charges, and she did not have grounds to refuse the tribunal's jurisdiction under Kethani law. And she had never once in 31 major decisions violated Kethani law, because Kethani law was the architecture that held the plurality together. And the day she chose her own preference over that architecture was the day she ceased to be sovereign and became merely a queen. Ferreira was brought in. He came without restraints because she had not ordered restraints, and he entered the assembly space and looked at the configuration and said nothing. His face was doing the reading thing, the thing where it took in information. "Sergeant Ferreira," Velthus said, in clipped standard. "You are charged under Plurality Code 7-Vel with improper bonding influence on a member of the sovereign lineage. The evidence will be reviewed. You will be permitted a statement. After statement, the tribunal will convene." Ferreira said, "Is Chauvel here?" Velthus blinked, the slow blink of genuine surprise, which Velshara had not seen on his face in many years. "That is not relevant. I'd like to know that she's okay. Her condition is not... She took a hit yesterday. I want to make sure she's okay." The room was very quiet. Then Velshara's second-cast commander, Tavel, made a sound at the edge of register that might have been astonishment. The human was standing in front of a tribunal that had the authority to end its life and was asking after the health of a child. The child in question answered for herself. Chauvel came through the assembly door. She had not been summoned. She had not been told of the tribunal. Velshara had given explicit orders that her daughter be kept from this room until it was over. And yet here she was, her secondary carapace still bandaged, her bioluminescent markings cycling in the deep, steady pattern of deliberate calm that adults used when they were choosing a display, not simply emitting one. Velthus said, "Princess, this chamber is not appropriate for a..." "I heard," Chauvel said. Velshara said, "Chauvel." Her daughter looked at her. Not the way hatchlings looked at sovereigns, with the reflexive deference encoded in their biology. The way adults looked at adults, when something important was being decided. "The charge is improper bonding influence," Chauvel said. She was using tribunal register. Velshara did not know when her daughter had learned tribunal register. "I am the subject of the charge. I am entitled to address the tribunal under Plurality Code 7-Vel, subsection 12, as the bonded party." The room held very still. Velthus looked at Velshara. Velshara looked at her daughter, 9 years old, secondary carapace still soft, standing in a tribunal chamber in her bandages, having memorized the subsections. The subsection permits it. Velshara said. Chauvel turned to the tribunal. Sergeant Ferreira did not influence my bonding, she said. Her markings were absolutely steady. I chose. I was frightened. I was hurt. He stayed. He kept me safe. He told me stories when the power was out and I could not see. And the stories were frightening ones because he said I was too old to be told comforting ones. And he was right. And that mattered to me. She paused. In Kethani law, improper bonding influence requires the absence of valid choice in the bonded party. I was not absent of choice. I am standing here. The silence in the assembly space had a different texture now. Velthus said, "You are 9 cycles." "Yes," Chauvel said, "and I know the subsection." The room stayed quiet. Velthus was reviewing something on his judicial display that he appeared to be finding displeasing. The judiciary officials were doing what judiciary officials did when they had not anticipated the shape of a proceeding. Very carefully, not looking at anything. From somewhere in the corridors beyond the assembly door, in a direction that Velshara calculated was approximately the secondary detention annex. A voice began to sing. Low, rhythmic. The same song. The words in a language she didn't speak. The melody stripped down to something that moved through the station walls and arrived in the assembly space anyway. Corporal Okafor, Velshara's data told her. Ferreira's crewmate, in the secondary annex where the tribunal's escort had placed the remaining human crew. Ferreira's expression, when she looked at him, was impossible to read. He was looking at the wall. He was, she thought, and it was a thought she would need to put down somewhere and examine later, trying not to show something on his face. Velthus said, "We will need to confer." "Yes," Velshara said. "You will." Velshara dismissed the honor guard. This was not procedure. This was choice. She was aware of the distinction. Ferreira was in the secondary holding bay, not the confinement quarters. Tribunal protocol had required a formal holding location. And he was sitting on the floor again, his back against the wall, his left arm resting across his knee. The burn from the weapon discharge was healing. Her medic had treated it 3 days ago. She could see from here that the tissue was knitting correctly. The human's files said accelerated healing at breakpoint, which she had noted and not fully processed until she watched it happen on Chauvel's behalf, and here it was, happening now, quietly, without any drama about it. Okafor was in the next holding bay. The wall between them was not thick enough to be properly private. She could, distantly, hear him breathing. Velshara sat across from Ferreira. She had come here intending to offer him a clean death. This was a kindness by Kethani standards. Velthus's tribunal had the power to impose a sentence that was not clean. She had come because she was the sovereign, and she owed him this, and because Chauvel had looked at her in the assembly space in a way that made her feel she owed him more than that. And she had not been able to reconcile those two things on the walkover. Ferreira looked at her. "How is she?" it said. This question again. This question first. "She is well," Velshara said. Her subsection citation was correct. The tribunal will need time. "Okay." "Sergeant." She found the word she had been looking for in the maintenance bay and had not been able to hold on to. "The charge. The thing it calls improper bonding influence." She stopped. Started again. "What happened on this station? In 9 days? I need to understand what happened." Ferreira was quiet with a pause. "She was 9 years old," it said. "And she was alone. And she was scared. We had a siege going, and we had 7 people, and it was not... It searched for something. It was not a controlled situation. I needed her calm. I needed her to trust me. And then, and then the calm stopped being tactical, and it was just. The pause again. She needed someone. You are not Cathani. No. You are not her kind. No. Then why? Because she was there. Ferreira said it the way it said things that were obvious to it. The flat certainty of a thing it had not once questioned. She was scared, and she was there, and she needed a father, and I was the only option available. She needed a father. Velshara sat with this sentence. She was sovereign. She was also Chevel's mother, which was a different thing, a thing she kept beside the sovereign identity, the way you kept something valuable in a separate compartment. Not hidden, just separate. Because if it was separate, it could not be used as a lever. She had been alone for 8 years, since Chevel's broodfather's death, which she did not discuss and had not discussed in 8 years, because because it was an event her cognition could not fully integrate. And she had found that the most effective response was to not attempt integration. I was the only option available. She looked at Ferreira and found him looking at her, and his face was the undefended expression, the one she had seen in the med bay when he looked at Chevel, the one she had been cataloging and failing to name. And she was close enough now, in this quiet room without the honor guard, to understand what the expression was. It was the face of someone who was telling the truth and knew it, and had nothing else to offer. She turned to look at the viewport in the wall. Chevel was on the other side of it. She had not been told she could be there. She was there anyway. Her small face was pressed to the transparent panel, her bioluminescent markings very dim, very still. The pattern adults used for something they did not want to disturb. She was watching Ferreira with an expression that the Cathani did not have a name for. Velshara had been watching it since the med bay, and she had been trying to find the name for it in every taxonomy she knew, and she had not found it. And sitting here in this room, she understood, for the first time, that she had not found it because the expression was not Cathani. It was human. Her daughter had learned an expression from a human, had learned to arrange the markings of her face, the settings of her bioluminescent patterns, in an entirely new configuration that had no Cathani precedent. And because she had spent 9 days with something that expressed itself differently and had absorbed it the way Cathani children absorbed everything, completely, without filter, without the managed processing that adults applied to new information. Chevel's face said, "You are safe. I am here. I am not going anywhere." Velshara had never seen a Cathani face say that before. She looked at the condensation on the viewport panel, where the temperature differential between the holding bay and the corridor was leaving water on the transparent material. There was one line of it that ran from the upper corner, branching twice, and she traced it with one foreleg without touching the panel, and did not finish the thought she had been about to think. "The tribunal will likely find in your favor," she said. "My daughter's argument was legally sound." "Okay," Ferreira said. "I wanted you to know that." The human looked at her for a moment. "How is she?" it said, and Velshara understood that this time he meant Velshara, not Chevel. No being had asked her that question in 8 years. She stood up. She said, "Get some rest, Sergeant." She left the holding bay without looking at the viewport again. In the corridor, she stood for a moment. The station hummed around her. She was on segment 3 before she caught herself. She stopped counting. The Dominion siege fleet came out of transit at 0400 station time. Not a scout team, not a boarding party. A fleet, 7 attack vessels and a command dreadnought. Exactly the kind of force deployment that the plurality's tactical models described as do not engage, no withdraw to secondary position, reassess. The dreadnought alone outmassed everything currently on or orbiting waypoint Herath by a factor of 11. Velshara received the alert and was in the primary command space within 30 seconds, her honor guard assembling behind her. Tavel had the tactical display live, the fleet's transit vector projections mapping forward in the deep amber that meant incoming at engagement speed. Velthus arrived 2 minutes later. He looked at the display. He looked at Velshara. "Sovereign," he said. "The correct action here is withdrawal." Velshara looked at the display. Waypoint Herath held 42 Cathani personnel, including her honor guard and tribunal officials, 4 surviving humans, her daughter. "We cannot outrun the dreadnought in this transit window," she said. "The tactical models recommend." "I have read the tactical models, Arbiter." Velthus's scent signature shifted to the old formal register, the one he used in courtrooms, and he said, "The plurality's interests are best served by removing the Sovereign from the engagement zone. Waypoint Herath is a fuel exchange post. It is not worth a Sovereign's life." The door opened. Ferreira came through it. He had not been summoned. He was in the partial armor he'd been wearing when his unit had arrived, which he'd clearly taken from wherever his confiscated equipment had been stored. And he had a weapons case in one hand and a tablet in the other, and he was already looking at the tactical display. 7 attack vessels and the dreadnought," he said. "Transit vector puts the first attack window at..." He did something on the tablet. 22 minutes if they hold current speed, or 14 if they push to combat burn. Velthus said, "This human has no standing to..." "The Herath station has 3 defensive emplacements," Ferreira said. 2 of them are offline. I have been trying to tell someone this for 4 days. He put the tablet on the nearest console. "I can get one back up. Maybe both if you give me someone who knows the emitter coupling system." Velshara looked at the tactical display. "Arbiter," she said, "please coordinate the civilian evacuation to the deep interior sections." Velthus looked at her. "Sovereign, the correct action is noted. Thank you." He left because she was sovereign and he had no recourse. He left with the particular rigidity of a being who believed he was correct and had been overruled by something that was not reason. Velshara looked at Tavel. "Get me the station's engineering logs. Cross-reference with Sergeant Ferreira's repair list." Tavel said, "Sovereign, the tactical models..." "Tavel, get me the logs." She got the logs. Ferreira was already moving, his tablet cross-referencing with the engineering display, marking emplacement access routes. He said without looking up, "You have people who can fight?" "I have an honor guard. And the 4 of us. 3 of us." He paused briefly. "Okafor is a very good shot." He moved toward the door. "Emitter coupling first. We have 12 minutes if they push to combat burn." Velshara said, "Sergeant." He stopped. "My honor guard will follow your tactical direction," she said. "This is not a conversation I would normally have with a prisoner." The expression again. The complicated one. Noted, a sovereign. He hesitated for just a moment. "Where is Chauvel?" "Secondary interior, with Velthus's people. Safe." Something in him settled. She could see it, a visible relaxation in the set of his shoulders. And then he was moving again. And Velshara followed him, and her honor guard followed her, and they went to fight a war together. The first emplacement came online 11 minutes later. Ferreira had done it by removing the coupling from the second emplacement and cannibalizing it. which was the kind of solution that her engineers had not considered because her engineers had not been trained to destroy one thing in order to save another. One emplacement instead of two. But one was live, and zero had been the previous state of affairs. The Dominion fleet opened fire at 21 minutes. Velshara had fought in 7 campaigns. She knew combat. She knew the specific quality of a space engagement from inside a station, the vibration through the hull, the way the artificial gravity fluctuated as the power system compensated, the smell of ozone and recycled air going stale as the filters began to struggle. She knew how to read a tactical display, and how to give orders, and how to absorb a loss and keep processing. She did not know how to do what she watched Ferreira do. He was everywhere. Not frantically. The human had a specific quality of motion in combat that she had not seen before. Something that was neither the explosive speed of the Kethani warrior caste, nor the mechanical efficiency of the Dominion soldier, but something else. Something that she realized after watching for several minutes was simply the sustained refusal to stop. He was not faster than the situation. He was slower. He was consistent. He went from the emplacement to the corridor breach, to the secondary hull, to the command space and back. And every time he arrived somewhere, he assessed it, and he acted, and he moved on. And he did this for 3 hours. Okafor died in the 4th hour, holding a junction corridor. Velshara knew it before Ferreira did, because she was in command space when the vital monitor went flat. She watched Ferreira's tablet receive the alert, the small light on the upper corner that changed color, and she watched him look at it. He looked at it for 4 seconds. Then he turned back to the console he was working on. Velshara sat with 4 seconds of a human looking at the death of his crewmate and then going back to work. She had a word, Thelvas, for the rational grief of accepting a correct loss. The understanding that a choice was made and was right and cost something. And the cost was real and the choice was still right. Every species she knew had an equivalent. It was one of the first things the Kethani Diplomatic Corps learned to look for. The Thelvas reflex. The proof that a species had the cognitive architecture to make hard decisions. She had thought she understood Thelvas. She had been watching it wrong. The Thelvas she knew was a settling, a closing. The thing that happened after you accepted a loss, which was stillness. What she was watching was Thelvas that had no still center at all. It was acceptance moving, a grief that did not stop. Loss held in one hand while the other hand did the work, and neither hand acknowledged the other. And it went on and on, because stopping was not part of the calculation. Ferreira got the second emplacement up in hour 5. The dreadnought pulled back at hour 6. Not destroyed, she didn't have the weapons for it. But she had heard it enough. 3 of the 7 attack vessels were debris. The dreadnought had taken damage to its transit drive. They would regroup and return, and when they returned, they would bring more. But they were not here right now, and right now was the only calculation that mattered. The command space went quiet. Velshara looked at the display, looked at Ferreira. He was sitting on the floor. She walked over and sat beside him. She was sovereign of the Kethani plurality. No, she did not sit on floors. She sat there anyway. They were both quiet. The station hummed around them. Somewhere in the secondary interior, Chauvel was probably doing the anxious waiting scent again. After a while, Ferreira said, he was good at it, holding corridors. His voice was the same register, level, doing the work. Hated being in space. Joined up because his sister dared him. Spent 15 years in deep space complaining about it. Velshara said, he stayed anyway. Yeah. Ferreira looked at his hands. Yeah. She thought about the word thelvas, about the specific sensation of watching a taxonomy fail in real time, about what it meant that her language had this word, and she was now watching it be a smaller word than the thing it was supposed to describe. She was on segment 4 before she caught herself. She stopped, did not count, sat there in the quiet with the human and the station's hum, and the Dominion fleet was retreating on the tactical display, and her daughter was alive in the interior. And something she did not have a word for was sitting right in the middle of her chest. And for the first time in 31 major decisions, she left it there without trying to file it. The station held. This fact took approximately 12 hours to become real in a way that Velshara could process fully. She had known it tactically. The display confirmed it. The Dominion vectors showed retreat. The Dreadnought's transit drive damage meant at minimum 8 cycles before return viable. But knowing something tactically and knowing it in the deeper register, the register where her brood mother's voice still sometimes said, "You are safe. You are home. I have you." Those were different things. The station held. Velthus's formal protest was filed with the Cathani High Archive within 4 hours of the engagement's end. It cited gross tactical risk to sovereign, use of non-allied combatant in defensive action, failure to comply with tactical withdrawal recommendations. All of this was technically within his authority to file. Velshara accepted the filing and removed him from tribunal authority over the Ferreira indictment, citing the conflict of interest provision of Plurality Judiciary Code. This was also within her authority. Velthus left on the next available transit with his judiciary officials and the formal record of 3 objections and 0 victories. The indictment was suspended pending review. She found Ferreira in the secondary bay where Okafor had been. The bay was empty now. The tactical team had cleared it, catalogued and secured Okafor's equipment, done the things you did when a soldier died holding a corridor. Ferreira was sitting on the floor again, in the spot that was probably where Okafor had been, and he was doing nothing. Just sitting. She came in and sat next to him. He looked at her. "You've been filing things," he said. "Yes." Velthus looked unhappy. He is very unhappy. He will continue to be unhappy for some time. He is very good at being unhappy. She settled against the wall. "The indictment is suspended. You are currently not charged with anything under plurality law." Ferreira was quiet. "The tribunal provision that Chauvel cited," he said, "was correctly applied, yes." Velshara looked at the far wall. "My daughter has been studying plurality law in some depth. I was not fully aware of the extent." A pause. "I am now aware." Ferreira made the sound that was amusement. Low. "She told me she was studying navigation." She was studying navigation and judiciary code and xenobiology, which I also did not know about. Velshara let out a breath. "She has my habits. I was told this by my own advisors when she was 6 cycles old, and I did not entirely believe it." "What habits?" "Preparing for things she has not been told to prepare for." She looked at her hands, her foreclaws, finding the appropriate subsection. Ferreira was looking at her with the undefended expression. She said, "She is going to grow into something very difficult to manage." "Yeah," Ferreira said. "No, she is." Chauvel herself arrived approximately 3 minutes later, which suggested she had been waiting in the corridor for a polite interval. She came in, assessed the situation, 2 adults sitting on the floor, and sat down between them without being invited. She leaned against Ferreira's arm. She looked at her mother. Velshara looked at her daughter. The markings on Chauvel's face were doing the expression that had no Cathani name. The human expression. The one that said, "You are safe. I am here. I am not going anywhere." Velshara looked at Ferreira. He was going home. His compact would recall him. There were protocols for this. The station's crisis was functionally resolved. The military calculus would require it. He would go. And Chauvel would grow up in the plurality, and the specific quality of this moment was going to become a memory. And then a formative event in a hatchling's cognition. And then one of the invisible stones in the foundation of who her daughter grew to be. She was sovereign. She made decisions about irreversible things every day. She thought about Thelvas, the correct loss, the thing that was right even when it cost you. She thought about how small that word now seemed. Ferreira was going home. And something in the decision about what that meant opened up in the space between tactical and the other register, and she found she was not closing it. She reached out. She did not plan it. She did not calculate it. She simply reached out, the way hatchlings reached, the way Chauvel reached without thinking about reaching. And she set her foreleg gently across Ferreira's arm. She did not have a word for it. In Kethani, there was no protocol for this. There was bonding ritual, which required cycles of process and formal sanction. There was Thelvas, which was a closing. There was Velshara itself, her own name, which meant the one who holds, which she had never applied to anything outside the plurality. In the human language, she suspected, the word was something much shorter. Ferreira was still for a moment. Then he said, "Yeah." The word meant nothing. The word meant everything. It meant, "I understand. I am here." It does not need a name. Chauvel's bioluminescent markings went very warm and very still, the pattern that adults used for things they did not want to disturb. The station hummed around them. Outside, in the void beyond the viewport at the far end of the bay, the stars were doing what stars did. Burning, constant, indifferent, beautiful. And Velshara sat on the floor of a border station fuel exchange post in a corridor no taxonomist would ever classify. With her foreleg on a human's arm and her daughter pressed against his other side, and felt the Velthan sensation for the last time. Information that could not be integrated into existing structure. She did not try to integrate it. She let it be what it was. In the weeks that followed, in the dispatches to the High Archive, in the formal record of Waypoint Herath, in the depositions for the suspended tribunal, it's in the diplomatic exchanges that began the lengthy process of formalizing what had happened at a fuel exchange post in the corridor during a 9-day siege. There was a line in Velshara's personal communication to the plurality's senior diplomatic corps that her advisors flagged for her attention 3 times before she was made aware of it. The line read, "There are things in this universe for which we do not yet have words. We should not pretend this is a problem to be solved." Her advisors were not sure what to do with this line. They asked if she wanted it removed. She left it. She thought Ferreira would have said it that way. She thought, and this was the thought she carried into everything that came after, every hard decision, that every moment when the taxonomy failed and she was standing in something new without a name for it. She thought Chauvel would grow up already knowing that. The expression her daughter had learned. The one that said, "You are safe. I am here. I am not going anywhere." Velshara looked at the line in the dispatch one more time, in the quiet of her command space, with the station humming its constant note around her. She left it,